The base shook at 0400 when the mortar hit the eastern perimeter. Nobody died, but the blast threw me into a concrete wall hard enough to crack 2 ribs and leave me with a concussion that had the flight surgeon grounding me for the rest of the rotation. 7 months into a 9-month deployment, and just like that, I was going home. I didn't call ahead. The satellite connection had been unreliable for weeks, and honestly, I thought about the look on my son's face when he saw me walk through the door. Marcus was 12, old enough to pretend he was too cool to miss his dad, but young enough that I knew better. I'd imagined it the whole flight home, him trying to stay calm, then giving up and running at me anyway. That was the image I held onto through Germany, through Atlanta, through the 2-hour drive from the airport in a rental car that smelled like air freshener and someone else's life. I pulled into the driveway at 6 in the evening on a Tuesday. The house looked the same from the outside. Sandra's car was there. A bicycle I didn't recognize leaned against the garage, too small to be Marcus's. I assumed a neighbor kid had left it. The front door was unlocked. Sandra was in the kitchen, phone to her ear, back turned. She didn't hear me come in. I set my bag down in the hall and said her name. She spun around. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. James. Not a greeting. Something closer to a warning. Nice to see you too. I looked around the kitchen. Where's Marcus? She said something into the phone. I'll call you back, and set it on the counter face down. He's at a program. What kind of program? A good one? She crossed her arms. A residential program. Dr. Whitfield recommended it. Marcus was struggling. James. Acting out. Grades dropping. Some incidents at school. You weren't here. I'd been in a combat zone. But I didn't say that. What program? Where? Cornerstone Youth Academy. It's about an hour east, out past Morrow County. Dr. Whitfield said it's the best in the state. Structure, counseling, outdoor education. Marcus has been there 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I'd been gone 7 months, and my son had been somewhere I didn't know about for 6 weeks. I'd talked to Sandra 3 times in the last month. The connection issue, the time difference, the op tempo. 3 times. You didn't think to mention this? I tried calling. The connection, Sandra. He needed help that I couldn't give him alone. Her voice cracked just slightly, then steadied. You weren't here. I made a decision. Give me the address. She hesitated the way people hesitate when they know the answer but don't want to give it. A breath too long, a small recalibration behind the eyes. They have a strict visitation policy. Families aren't supposed to. Address, she told me. I was back in the rental car before she finished the sentence. The drive east took 50 minutes on a 2-lane highway that eventually turned to a county road lined with pine trees so thick the headlights barely reached the shoulder. The GPS dropped signal twice. When it came back the second time, I was 2 miles from the destination, a property listed under a name I didn't recognize. Cornerstone Foundation for Youth Development, LLC. The LLC made something tighten in my chest. A wooden sign at the entrance said Cornerstone Youth Academy in carved letters. Below it, smaller, building character, building faith. A chain-link gate stood open. I drove through. The main building was a converted farmhouse with new additions that didn't quite match metal, siding painted white. Windows with bars that I told myself were probably just security. 3 vehicles in the lot. A work van, 2 pickup trucks, no school buses, no basketball hoops. Nothing that looked like a place for kids. I parked and walked to the front entrance. The door opened before I knocked. The man who answered was maybe 50, built like someone who'd worked outdoors his whole life. He wore a Cornerstone polo shirt and a patient smile that didn't go anywhere near his eyes. Can I help you, sir? James Calloway. I'm here to see my son, Marcus Calloway. The smile adjusted slightly. Mr. Calloway, we do ask that families schedule visits in advance. Our program relies on structured. I just got back from 7 months in Afghanistan. I didn't schedule it. I'd like to see my son. Of course. I completely understand. The patience in his voice was the professional kind, the kind that gets practiced. If you'll come inside and fill out our visitor protocol form, we can reach out to our director, Mr. Gavin. It may take a little time this evening, but we'll absolutely. Where are the kids right now? A slight pause. In their evening sessions. At 6 o'clock on a Tuesday. Our schedule runs differently than a traditional school. The structure is intentional. It's part of the therapeutic model. He stepped slightly to the side, blocking the hallway beyond the entrance. If you'll just, I'll wait here. He made a call on a radio clipped to his belt. I couldn't hear what he said. I stood in the entrance and looked at what I could see, a reception area with motivational posters on the walls, a clipboard sign-in sheet, a locked interior door with a keypad entry. Nothing on the walls showed photos of kids doing normal program activities. No art projects, no sports trophies, the kind of absence that only becomes visible once you're looking. A second man appeared from a side hallway, younger, late 20s, same polo. He positioned himself near the exterior door without being obvious about it. I'd been in enough tense rooms to recognize when someone was blocking exits. "Mr. Gavin will be with you in just a moment," the first man said. Mr. Gavin turned out to be a lean man in his mid-40s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the easy manner of someone who spoke to anxious parents regularly. He extended his hand. "Mr. Calloway, welcome back from your service. We're grateful. I want to see Marcus." "Absolutely, and you will." He gestured toward a small office off the entrance. "If we could just sit down for a few minutes, I can walk you through where Marcus is in his program, what he's been working on. You can walk me through it with him in the room." Something behind Gavin's expression flickered. "Recovered fast. Our protocol requires that initial family contact after the first 30 days happens through our structured reunification process. It's for the child's benefit. Actually, abrupt contact without preparation can undo weeks of therapeutic progress. I had 2 cracked ribs wrapped under my shirt and a headache that had been running for 4 days. I was not in the mood for protocol. He's my son. I have legal custody. You don't have the authority to keep me from him." Actually, Gavin reached for a folder that was already sitting on the desk, like it had been waiting there. "Your wife provided us with a temporary guardianship authorization. Standard procedure for residential programs when the primary custodial parent is deployed. It grants Cornerstone Provisional Care Authority for the duration of the program enrollment." I looked at the document. Sandra's signature was at the bottom. The date was 43 days ago, 1 week after I'd deployed. Not 6 weeks. She'd been looking for this program before Marcus had any incidents. This isn't a medical facility. This isn't a foster placement. This is... I stopped. "Where is he right now?" "Not evening sessions. Specifically, the students are completing their work assignments for the day." Work assignments. Physical labor is a core component of our therapeutic model. Research shows that structured outdoor work builds... Show me. Gavin's cooperative manner developed an edge. "Mr. Calloway, I understand you're emotional. You've been away. You've been in a difficult situation, and you come home to find your son in a program you weren't fully briefed on. I hear that. But our legal authorization is clear, our program is fully licensed, and your behavior right now is exactly the kind of dysregulation that makes it difficult for Marcus to." I walked past him. The young man near the door grabbed my arm. I removed his hand from my arm in a way that made him decide not to try again. The second man on the radio. I went down the hall toward the back of the building, through the locked door that someone had propped open with a rubber wedge, and out through a back exit into the evening air. The property opened up behind the building into about 20 acres of cleared land. To the left, a series of low outbuildings, dormitory style. To the right, a field that had been planted with something. In the fading light, I could see figures moving in the rows. I walked toward the field. There were 11 children. I counted them as I got closer. Ages ranged from maybe 10 to 16. They were pulling weeds from what appeared to be a vegetable crop, beans or soybeans, I couldn't tell in the light, and loading the pulled material into wheelbarrows. They wore the same gray shirts. Most of them moved with the slow, mechanical pace of people who had been doing the same task for hours. Marcus was near the far end of the third row. I knew him by the way he held his shoulders slightly hunched to the left, a habit he'd had since he was 7 and broke his collarbone falling off a bike. He'd never fully unlearned the protective posture. His hair had grown out. He'd lost weight that he hadn't had to lose. I said his name. He straightened slowly, like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. Then he turned. The look on his face when he saw me standing there was something I will carry with me until I die. Not relief, first confusion, then a kind of desperate hope, like he was afraid to believe it was real. "Dad? Hey, buddy." He didn't run. He walked to me very quickly, and when he got close enough, he grabbed my arm with both hands and held on. He was 12 years old and he was shaking. A man I hadn't noticed standing at the edge of the field with a clipboard started toward us. "Hey, you can't be out here. This is a supervised activity. Give me a minute, sir. This is a breach of our... Give me a minute with my son. Marcus's face was pressed against my shoulder. He was trying not to cry and not winning. I held on. They said you weren't coming, he said into my jacket. They said you extended. They said you requested an extension because he stopped. Because what? He pulled back just enough to look at me. They said you requested an extension because being here was too hard. Because of me. His voice broke on the last two words. Miss, Terry said it, that dealing with me was too much, and that's why you kept re-upping. I had never re-upped. I had never requested an extension. I had been counting down days. Miss Terry lied to you, I said. I got hurt. I came home early, and the first thing I did was come here. He swallowed hard, nodded, then grabbed my arm again like he was going to lose me. The field supervisor was on his radio. I looked around at the other children. A few had stopped working and were watching us. One girl, maybe 10, small for her age, was watching with the expression of someone watching a thing they wanted very badly, but didn't believe was available to them. 2 boys near the wheelbarrow had gone completely still. A kid standing closest to me, maybe 11 years old, gap-toothed and sunburned, spoke so quietly I almost missed it. Is someone going to come for us too? He asked. Not to me specifically. To the air, to whoever might be listening. I looked at him. What's your name? Derek. Derek, stay close to me. Gavin appeared from the back of the building with 2 staff members flanking him and a phone held up, recording. Mr. Calloway, I'm advising you right now that what you're doing constitutes interference with a licensed program and potentially kidnapping under. Call the police, I said. Please. He faltered. That wasn't the response he expected. He'd expected the threat to freeze me. Call them, I said again. I would love for law enforcement to come out here right now and see 11 children pulling weeds in the dark on a Tuesday evening. I had my own phone out. I photographed the field. I photographed the children in their identical gray shirts. I photographed the dormitory buildings with their narrow windows and the padlock visible on the outer door. Marcus hadn't let go of my arm. Gavin lowered his phone slightly. You're making a serious mistake. I'm a U.S. Army sergeant who just got home from a combat deployment to find my son in a field at 6:30 at night doing physical labor. I kept my voice even. I've made one phone call tonight and it wasn't to you. It was to a sergeant I'd served with who was now a county sheriff's deputy 2 counties over. He'd told me he couldn't officially respond outside his jurisdiction, but that he knew who could, and that I should stay on the property and keep my phone recording. The first cruiser arrived 18 minutes later. The deputy was a woman named Hendricks, maybe 30, with the careful eyes of someone who was already assessing the situation before she got out of the car. She looked at the field, she looked at the children, she looked at Gavin and his 2 staff members. She asked me a single question, "Is that your son?" And when I said yes, she turned to Gavin and said, "Sir, I'm going to need to see your licensing documentation, your staff certifications, and your facility inspection records." What came next took 5 hours. 2 more deputies arrived. Then a state licensing investigator who happened to be reachable on an emergency line. Then a woman from Child Protective Services who drove an hour in the dark and arrived looking like she'd been through something like this before. Gavin cooperated at first, with the careful cooperation of someone who believed his paperwork would protect him. He had paperwork. The facility was registered. It had passed an inspection 14 months earlier. But licensing investigators look at different things than general inspectors, and what this one found in the first 30 minutes was a daily schedule that had the children logging 6 to 8 hours of agricultural labor per day, a contract that parents signed which transferred provisional custody with language buried in paragraph 11. Financial records showing Cornerstone was selling the harvested crops to 3 separate distributors, and a disciplinary log that included entries like isolation room, 4 hours, and privilege removal, meals next to children's names. Marcus stayed beside me the entire time. He told his story to the CPS worker in short, flat sentences, like someone reading from a list of things that happened to another person. First week, they took his phone. Second week, he was moved from the main dormitory to a smaller room with 2 other boys, because he'd asked when he could call home. The staff told him his father had been notified, that his father knew where he was, that his father had said Marcus needed to finish the program before contact was appropriate. He'd stopped asking after week 3. I sat next to him in the back of my rental car while he talked, with the door open and the dome light on, and I didn't look away from his face once. A boy from another room had been at Cornerstone for 4 months. His parents believed he was in a therapeutic wilderness program with weekly family calls. The calls had been staged. Staff members would tell the parents Marcus was doing well, using first names, reading from reports. The parents had no idea their son was working fields. Sandra arrived around 9. She'd driven herself, and she stood at the edge of the parking lot looking at the cruisers and the people moving in and out of the building. When she saw Marcus, she started toward him. He looked at her and then looked away. She stopped moving. She'd known something, I realized later. Not everything I believed she hadn't known about the staged calls or the isolation room, but she'd known the program was unconventional. She'd known contact was restricted. She'd told herself the restrictions were therapeutic. She'd needed to believe the problem was being handled while I was gone, and she'd needed it badly enough to stop asking questions. I didn't feel sorry for her that night. Sitting next to my son in a parking lot while investigators cataloged what had been done to 11 children, I didn't have room for it. Marcus was treated by a paramedic on scene, mild dehydration, calloused and cut hands, some bruising on his forearms that he said came from a consequence session the previous week that he described carefully and without drama. The paramedic looked at me when Marcus was done talking. I nodded. She wrote it down. They offered to transport him to the hospital. He grabbed my hand and said he'd go if I drove him myself. I drove him myself. He fell asleep in the passenger seat before we cleared the property gate. At the hospital, they gave him fluids, treated the cuts on his hands, and let him sleep in a proper bed for the first time in weeks. He slept for 11 hours. I sat in the chair next to the bed and didn't sleep at all. Gavin and 2 senior staff members were arrested 3 days later. The charges included child labor violations, fraud, false imprisonment, and a federal count related to the interstate sale of crops produced by minors without compensation. The state licensing board suspended Cornerstone's registration within 48 hours of the investigation report. The other 10 children were returned to their families. 2 of the families hadn't known anything was wrong. 4 families had suspected but been reassured by the staged contact calls. The remaining 4 families were still being interviewed when the arrests happened. Derek, the gap-toothed boy from the field, had been there for 3 months. His mother had signed the paperwork at a community health fair where Cornerstone had a booth advertising subsidized therapeutic programs for at-risk youth, free of charge. All expenses covered by the foundation. His mother was a single parent working 2 jobs. She'd thought she was getting her son help. Sandra accepted a plea arrangement 9 months later. She'd been formally charged with child endangerment for the custody transfer and for her knowledge of the contact restrictions. Her attorney argued she was a secondary victim of a predatory program. The judge gave her probation, mandatory counseling, and a suspended sentence contingent on no contact with Marcus, except through a supervised arrangement that Marcus himself could choose to participate in or not. Marcus chose not to, at first. Then, about a year later, he agreed to 1 supervised session with a family therapist present. I didn't ask him how it went. He told me on his own when he was ready that it hadn't fixed anything, but that he'd said what he needed to say, and that felt like enough for now. Therapy was Tuesday afternoons with a counselor named Mr. Adebayo, who had a corner office with a window that looked out on a small garden. Marcus came home from the first session and said nothing. From the second session, and said the guy seemed okay. From the third session, and mentioned offhand that he was going to keep going. I counted that as a significant victory. The nightmares came for about 4 months. I'd hear him in the next room, and I'd sit outside his door in the hall until they passed. I didn't knock unless he called out. He never asked me why I was there in the mornings when he opened the door and found me reading in the hallway. I think he knew. The thing that didn't come back immediately was the ease he'd had before. The kid who used to fill the house with noise bouncing a basketball in the driveway, watching the same YouTube channels too loud, talking to his friends on the phone for 40 minutes about nothing. That kid was quieter now. Not broken, just careful. Like he'd learned that things could be taken away, and he hadn't fully unlearned that lesson yet. Then, about 4 months after he came home, I walked into the living room and found him on the couch, with his old lacrosse gear spread out around him, cleaning his stick with the focused attention he used to give it before a game. He looked up. Coach Porter emailed. He said, "They're running a spring pickup league. He said my spot's still there if I want it. Do you want it?" He looked back at the lacrosse head in his hands. "Maybe. I don't know yet." A pause. I think I want to try. He tried. He was rusty for the first 3 weeks, and I watched from the sideline pretending I was only there to drop him off. He saw me every time and never said anything about it, which I chose to interpret as permission. By the end of the spring season, he was starting again. The trial lasted 2 weeks. I testified about what I found on the property, the field, the children, the schedule, Marcus's condition. The defense argued that Cornerstone was a legitimate therapeutic program that had made some administrative errors. The jury took 6 hours. Gavin received 18 years. His deputy director received 12. 3 other staff members received sentences between 4 and 8 years. During the sentencing phase, the prosecutor read a victim impact statement from Derek's mother. She'd written it herself, and she'd asked that the prosecutor read it aloud rather than her because she was afraid she wouldn't get through it. It described dropping Derek off at the community health fair, the brochure with the smiling children, the foundation representative who'd told her this program had changed hundreds of lives. It described the phone calls she'd received from staff members speaking in her son's name. It described driving to the facility after 4 months to pick him up for what she'd been told was a supervised family visit, and finding instead investigators and police tape. I sat in the courtroom and listened to every word. Afterward, in the parking lot, I introduced myself to her. Her name was Carol. She was 41, small, with the composed posture of someone holding themselves together by decision rather than ease. "How's Derek?" I asked. "Getting there," she said. "His teacher says he's quiet in class now. He wasn't quiet before." She looked at the courthouse. "How's your son?" "Getting there," I said. She almost smiled. A year after the trial ended, I got a call from a researcher at a state university who was compiling data on predatory residential programs for youth. She'd found 47 facilities operating under similar models in 11 states, some using therapeutic language, some using religious framing, some using academic credentials. The common thread was the same: targeting vulnerable families, isolating children from parents, extracting labor or financial value, and using legal paperwork to create barriers that most parents didn't know how to navigate. She asked if Marcus would be willing to be interviewed for the study. I told her I'd ask him. He said yes. He was 14 by then, with the serious, particular thoughtfulness that he'd developed since coming home, the kind of thinking that took longer but went deeper. He did the interview on a Saturday afternoon and came out of it looking tired but not depleted. He made himself a sandwich in the kitchen and sat at the counter. "She said there were 47 programs," he said. "I know. That's a lot of kids." "Yes." He ate for a moment. "Derek texted me last week. He made his school soccer team." "That's good." "Yeah." He looked at his sandwich. "It's good." I joined a parent advocacy group the following spring, a network of families who had been affected by predatory youth programs. We did outreach at community events, at pediatrician offices, at the kind of community health fairs where Cornerstone had found Derek's mother. We taught parents to ask specific questions before enrolling a child in any residential program. Can I visit unannounced? Can my child call me at any time? Who exactly holds legal authority over my child? And under what circumstances does that transfer? Are the staff licensed? Have they undergone background checks? The last one sounds obvious. It isn't. People in crisis don't always think clearly, and predatory programs count on that. They target the moments when families are desperate, when a parent is deployed, or working double shifts, or newly divorced, or facing something that feels too big to handle alone. They offer solutions packaged in the language of care. And they count on shame, the shame parents feel about struggling, the shame that makes them want to believe the problem is being handled so they can stop thinking about it. I'd felt that shame. I'd been 6,000 miles away for 7 months, and I'd wanted so badly to believe that Sandra had it handled, that Marcus was fine, that the 3 dropped calls and the 1-line texts meant things were fine, and not that something was quietly wrong. I'd had the instinct, buried under everything else, that I should have asked more questions, should have been harder to reassure, should have pushed through the difficulty of the satellite connection and made absolutely certain. 2 years after Cornerstone, Marcus and I drove out to the eastern part of the county on a Saturday with no particular plan. We ended up on the county road that ran past the old property. The main building had been demolished. The land had been sold. A family was growing something new there. I couldn't tell what from the road. Small plants, orderly rows, the ordinary look of land being used for food and not for something else. Marcus looked at it for a moment from the passenger window. "Doesn't look the same," he said. "No." Good. He looked away, pulled out his phone, started scrolling, dropped it in his lap, looked back out the window. I used to think about the other kids, wondering if they were okay. And now, I still think about it. But Derek's on the soccer team, and that one girl, the little one Amara, her mom messaged the group chat last month. She's doing gymnastics. So, he shrugged in the particular way he had of shrugging when he didn't have a word for something. They're not just survivors. They're doing things. I kept driving. Dad. Yeah, that first night, in the parking lot. He was looking straight ahead. I thought I was imagining you. I thought I made it up. I know. I didn't let go of your arm the whole time because I thought if I let go, you'd turn into something else. Like it wasn't actually you. A pause. That sounds weird. It doesn't sound weird. I wasn't going to cry. I told myself I wasn't going to. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. I'm glad the ribs were only cracked and not broken. I looked at him. Because if they'd been broken, they'd have kept you longer, he said. And you had to come home when you did. The timing had to be exactly that, or it doesn't work. He turned and looked at me with the particular directness he'd developed, the one that still sometimes caught me off guard. I've thought about that a lot. Everything had to go exactly wrong in exactly the right order. I didn't have an answer for that. I just drove. The sunlight came through the windshield flat and warm and unhurried, the way it does in early autumn when the angle has changed and the heat is finally giving up. Marcus found something on his phone that made him almost smile. He put an earbud in one ear and left the other ear open, the way he did when he was comfortable, not closed off, just halfway somewhere. I'd learned to read those signals. I'd had 2 years of practice. The road opened up ahead of us, flat and long, and I drove, and neither of us said anything, and that was exactly enough.